Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. I am ecstatic to have all of you have logged on today to this wonderful, outstanding series, the Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work Monday Night Lecture Series. This is our spring edition of that lecture series, and we're very excited in terms of what we have to offer you all this year. We know 2020, when you think about it, and all the elections that just unfolded and all the controversy surrounding the elections, one of the things that we know that in spite of all that we experience, the strength and resilience of the electoral process somehow managed to sustain itself. But in spite of it, which is why we're going to have this outstanding lecture today, we've seen significant changes in efforts in legislative voting take place since 2020. We've seen in Georgia, for example, laws being passed making it illegal to give water to people in line who are registering to vote. We've seen election polling places being substantially reduced, making it longer for people to vote. There are significant things that have really transpired since the 2020 election that is definitely worthy of us having this discussion. But what we do know that in our profession, because as social workers, we are change agents. And so we have that responsibility and that obligation as the Green Beret of social change to get ourselves out there to make a difference and have the necessary impact in the world of voting. And so today, this lecture series, I'm very excited as your facilitator of this discussion to bring this to the forum and engage in great discussions and dialogue with our outstanding speaker. But before we begin, it is only appropriate that we bring in the Dean of the Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work to give the welcome as well as to introduce our speakers for today. Dean Jones.
Thank you so much, Dr. White, for that wonderful introduction and really setting the stage for what this lecture is all about tonight. I too am very excited. I want to welcome all of you to the lecture. I know Dr. Thomas's class is watching. We can't see them, but they can see us. And I'm just excited to see so many of you here. I want to start by introducing our two panelists. I am excited about both of these young women. Dr. Mimi Abramovitz is my friend and colleague. We began this work together some 20 plus years ago. I was a junior faculty, she was a senior faculty. I had an opportunity to have this mentoring around inequality and the need for social justice and the need for social workers taking the lead in these activities back then. Mimi and I, along with several other colleagues, served on the Council on Social Work Education's first commission for diversity and social and economic justice. We were the founding members of that committee, which still, that committee still exists today. We also authored the proposal for that commission to develop the Center for Social and Economic Justice, which I had the pleasure of serving as chair for a couple of years. So we go way back on this work, and I was just so excited to connect with Mimi around this voting and social work piece. And it's just been really, really a thrill. I know the level of commitment that she has when it comes to these issues. So I just want to share a little bit with you about her background. She is the Bertha Capen Reynolds Professor Emerita of Social Policy at Silberman School of Social Work at Hunter College. Her research interests include the U.S. welfare state, poverty, inequality, activism, and the impact of public policy on human services organizations. Let me say that again. Activism and the impact of policy, public policy on human service organizations, all viewed through the lens of race, class, and gender. She's widely published. She's authored 5 books. She's currently writing her 6th book, which is entitled Gender Obligations, the History of Activism Among Black and White Working Class Women since 1900s. She is one of the co-founders of the Welfare Rights Initiative at Hunter College, and currently co-leads the National Social Work Voter Mobilization Campaign, also known as Voting is Social Work. And many of you on this call participated with Dr. Thomas and several other colleagues here in the school on the Voting is Social Work campaign this past spring. So this past fall. So we want to welcome Dr. Abramovitz. I want to go on to our second presenter tonight, someone that many of you are very familiar with, Dr. Terry Platt. Dr. Platt currently serves as the director of the Isabella T. Jenkins Honors Program, and she's an associate professor of public administration and a faculty affiliate with the Center for Cancer Research and Therapeutic Development at Clark Atlanta University. Dr. Platt comes to us with over 15 years of teaching experience in public policy, research, methodologies, and American government. Dr. Platt actively supports student, voter, and civic engagement through partnerships and collaboration with the Andrew Goodman Foundation, All in Democracy Challenge, and as a member of the advisory board for the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition. So as you can see, we have two very dynamic people here tonight to talk with us about this whole process around voter registration, voter engagement. And Dr. Platt worked along with us this past fall, Dr. Thomas and the group, around voter mobilization, voter engagement. And I think, Dr. Platt, we had a touch point of over 2,000 people. I think that's quite significant, and I still give them kudos for that. And the last thing I want to say is, one of the things that we are hoping for you to get out of this is to keep in mind that everything Dr. White said is real. That's number one. Number two, 2024 will be here before you know it, and we'll be voting again. And number three, all of my students on this call, I want you to make a commitment to continue to involve yourself with voter engagement through Dr. Thomas and some of the other faculty here at school. And those of you who are not my students, I hope that you will work in your communities to do voter engagement. So with that having been said, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Abramovitz. I think we're right on time, Mimi.
Thank you, Dean Jenny, for that, taking me down memory lane. Great fun, and I share all your sentiments about the time we worked together and look forward. Glad we've reconnected and look forward to more of the same. And so before I start, I just want to say hello to you all in the great state of Georgia, from me in the great state of New York, because I'm happy to be connecting with you, and I look forward to a dialogue after we finish talking. I guess I need my PowerPoint.
And a quick housekeeping as John gets the PowerPoint up. For those of us that are on the Zoom, please put your questions in the chat, and when we get to the Q&A period, I'll raise some of those. Some of those questions may be too good, and I might bring you off of mute to answer them, but we're looking forward to it. I think we're ready to go now, Doc.
Okay, so as Jenny said, I'm the Bertha Capen Reynolds Professor of Social Policy at the Silberman School of Social Work and the CUNY Graduate Center. I co-chair Voting is Social Work, and I'm also a member of the board of the Social Work Democracy Project. Next. So I'm gonna say a word about what is Voting is Social Work. What do? We engage and mobilize social workers, students, faculty, agency practitioners, and the community to register people to vote. We ensure that people get to the polls, cast their votes, especially those targeted by voter suppression. We promote ongoing civic engagement in social work education, social services, and the community. And it sounds a lot like what Terry Platt is doing, and some of you are also doing. And I hope you'll visit our website listed below for all sorts of resources that we use, and hopefully that will be helpful to you too. Next. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my thoughts on democracy and the vote. As co-chair of the National Social Voter Mobilization Campaign, I have been asking myself the following question for months, and maybe you have too. How have voter suppression, election subversion, and the false claims of voter fraud affected our democratic institutions? First, on January 6 and 21, we witnessed an attempt to overthrow the US government, which in some times is considered a crime. On November 1st, President Biden formally warned us of this threat. And since then, after the 11/22 midterm elections, threats to democracy have been center stage in the news, the social media, everywhere. Everyone's worried. As co-chair, I also spend much of my time making sure that voting is social work. Voting rights and democracy go hand in hand, as you know. Therefore, today, I want to step back for a few minutes to reflect first on the ongoing attack on US democracy, so we're all on the same page. Next. My first reflection. Remember that democracy cannot be taken for granted. Living in Georgia, you already know that. Next. Second, voting is the most basic right in our democracy. But, as I hope you also know, it was not easy to get here. Next. History tells us that since 1900, the victories of social movements have played a key role in what we've been able to do. Next. So you may remember that women won the right to vote in the early part of the century. And here's a picture of women in Ohio of the suffrage movement office. Notice those outfits. Next. The civil rights movement fought for and won the right to vote in the 1960s. And this is a picture of one of the thousands of marches that took place in cities and towns and states around the country to try to get persons of color, particularly, the right to vote. Next. And here, Lyndon B. Johnson, president, signs the Voting Rights Act in 1965. And that was a high water mark in the effort to win voting rights. And shaking his hand is Martin Luther King. You may recognize him right there in the middle. Third reflection, the role of systemic racism in all of this. So we cannot assume that the US was a well-functioning democracy before January 6th. History reveals a troubling pattern. Each expansion of voting rights threatened white supremacy, male domination, and class power, and immediately came under attack by those seeking to maintain the status quo. I hope you're studying this in your classes. Next. Now this is a chock full of information. I'm just not gonna go over it. I'm just gonna tell you a little bit what it says. So this is the pattern I just referred to, a repeated pattern of struggle, progress, and backlash. So these are selected struggles. There was a civil war, civil rights movement, and the election of the first vice president. Each one of these brought huge gains, especially for Black people, Black voters. And instantly, these gains challenged white supremacy. And after each one, there was a response, which was an effort to restore white supremacy. So in the early part of the century, there was racial violence, lynching, Black massacres. You may remember the Tulsa, Oklahoma story because it was highlighted at the 100th anniversary in 2021. And then there was ongoing and much police brutality, which I'm sad to say is still with us. Voter suppression starts then, but then especially after the enslaved people are freed, we see poll taxes, literacy tests, felon disenfranchisement, voter intimidation, all sorts of things to stop Black people from voting way back in 1865. And that lasted for 100 years till 1965. And then we had a little break with the civil rights era starting about 1960. But even then, there was weak enforcement of the voting rights laws and manipulation of the political process with things that we still have with us, the filibuster and gerrymandering. And there's now since the mid-70s, the attack on voting rights, some of these things are still going on, but the Supreme Court ended pre-clearance requirements for states that were in violation of the Civil Rights Act. So we can talk more about that later. Voter suppression laws are revived with a vengeance, and the new efforts to overturn election results. So that's a lot said, a lot of words, but it's a long and troublesome history. Next. So I'm going to go over some of these things. Voter suppression was the intentionally, and I'm underscoring intentionally, designed to demoralize the electorate, suggests that the system is rigged, makes people think that voting does not count, does not matter, and makes people think their vote does not count. Last year, lawmakers in 39 states considered at least 408 restrictive bills that can make it harder for people to register to vote, stay on the rolls, and or vote, up from 75 bills in 24 states the year before. And was mentioned earlier, you can't bring water while they're standing on line is just one of those. Next. So here's a catalog of current voter suppression laws. I'm not going to go over them, but take a minute to look at them and then see if you can see how many of them exist in Georgia. I'm sure there's quite a few of these that Georgia has adopted, unfortunately. Next. So election subversion, this is a term that's just coming into discussion these days. We didn't know much about it, so I'll give you a brief definition next. It intentionally interferes with the administration of elections and overrides the will of the voters. And I read in the paper today, someone said, voter suppression has been ongoing for a long time and people have found some workarounds that, through just resilience and diligence and willing to stand on line for a long time. Election subversion is very serious and more serious in a different way because it replaces existing election administrators with highly partisan officials. It substitutes preferred candidates for those who voters choose, criminalizes the election certification process. It tries to do all these things and damages the legitimacy of and trust in the government and democratic process. The reason I said this was more important because it's a structural change in the process of elections, which is very hard to undo once it's put into place. So in last year, 27 states considered 151 bills to subvert, overturn, or undermine elections and otherwise override the will of the voters, up from 148 the year before. So you see, all these things are on the rise. Stop the steal is one of their main slogans. Next. So election deniers are on the ballot in 2022. If you watch the news at all, which I hope you do, although I know many people younger than me often don't. So for the first time ever, over 300 candidates, that's 300 in various races, usually state and local races, supported the assertion that the 2020 presidential election was stolen and American elections are deeply flawed. They are backed by something called the independent state legislature theory. And I hope the faculty in here take it up in your class. It maybe sound a little boring, but it's a misreading of the Constitution that would give state legislators wide authority to gerrymander election maps, pass voter registration laws, and even overturn elections if they did not like the outcome. It says the Constitution contains a provision named the independent state legislative theory, and now it's very old, they're trying to bring it forward to accomplish this election subversion. Several sitting justices of the Supreme Court have voiced their interest in making it a new law of the land, and it's currently before the Supreme Court. They are not fooling around, and we got to take this really, really seriously. Next. Gerrymandering redistricting, you're probably more familiar with. Since the 2020 census, states have redrawn their election districts. They do it every 10 years. Based on racially gerrymandered maps, many of the new districts systematically disenfranchise Black and Latinx voters. And along the way, the Supreme Court eviscerated the Voting Rights Act that took away the rules that would get the states in trouble if they violated those laws. And then I have to add, not to mention abortion. These are sort of on the same level. These huge protections have been taken away. Next. So what's the impact of this? Well, in the 2020 presidential election, there was record voter turnout, the largest in 120 years. Yet 71% of white persons, but only 58% persons of color voted. So what happened in these midterms? Well, there were always a smaller turnout. Slightly fewer people voted in 2022, 110 million versus than in 2018 when there were 115 million. It was still the highest midterm turnout in the past century. So midterm, that's important that it was a big turnout. However, the non-white turnout remains lower. I couldn't find national figures. I don't think all the states have reported it yet, but the Brennan Center is a great place to get this information. And they had a report on Georgia where 8.6% more of white people than non-white people in Georgia voted, higher than in any general election in the past decade, the gap, and roughly 50% higher than the last two midterms. So the racial gap got bigger, even though turnout was good. This mounting use of restrictive laws, voting laws, will worsen the racial gap. And this is what we've been talking about and we want to try to do something about. Next. Then, of course, going back to 2021, there was the coup on January 6th. The insurrectionist mob falsely claimed that the election was stolen. It, as you see in this picture, stormed the Capitol to stop Congress from counting the electoral votes. And if you follow the Congressional Commission that investigated this, there's all sorts of, troubling, disturbing information about people who participated in this, organized it, including some of our elected officials. So if you haven't listened to that, I recommend, I'm sure it's on YouTube, I'm sure it's recorded. You really should listen to it if you want to hear this story in full. Next. And we were warned, this wasn't all of a sudden. There's a book called How Democracy Dies by two political scientists, and they identify 4 warning signs of democracy in trouble. Each one of these has 4 parts, which I'm only going to give you the top line. Rejecting democratic norms or rules of the game, check. Denying legitimacy of political opponents, check. Curtailing opponents' civil liberties, including the media, check. Tolerating or encouraging violence, check. And by check, I mean nearly all these signs are evident in the US today. These authors, who are now often interviewed on television, conclude democracy does not necessarily end with a bang, a violent military revolution, or even by a coup. Rather, it ends with a whimper. That is the slow, steady weakening of critical democratic institutions, the vote, elections, the press, the courts, the media. So you see the graphic here, democracy is in danger. Next. Biden declared twice the long-standing guardrails of US democracy have been shaken. They have placed a dagger at the throat of democracy. We don't hear before this, we didn't hear presidents making these announcements very often. Next. But, and this is, I'm going to add, it's not just the vote. Next. Voter suppression and election subversion undermine other democratic institutions and the power of the people. And we're going to talk a little bit about these 4 things: book banning, loss of trust in the press, loss of trust in government, the rise of populist authoritarianism. These are the democratic institutions. Next. So, banning of books. 39 states have introduced more than 150 bills to ban more than 1,000 books on any topic that might make students uncomfortable. If you live in Florida, you know all about it. I don't know what's happening in Georgia on this, but I wouldn't be surprised. Less independent press. From 70 to 2020, the number of daily papers is down by 28%. The number of investigative journalists is down by 50%. Meanwhile, large media corporations own 80% of all daily newspapers. this is, how do people get their news? You see, this is a real problem because the press is no longer independent. And then there's loss of trust in government. In 1960, 3/4 of Americans trusted the federal government, always or most of the time. Today, it's 20%, an all-time low. And if people don't trust the government, we're in trouble. Even if you don't like everything the government does, we're still in trouble. Next. Then there's an index called the Democracy Index, calculated by The Economist, which is a British journal. And this sort of confirms what I've been talking about. It ranks 167 countries from 0 to 10 based on 5 measures of democracy and places them in these one of these 4 categories: a full or a flawed democracy, a hybrid or authoritarian regime. So you look at highlighted the US ranking by year, and you see our numbers have fallen from 822 to 7.85 over this X number of years. I can't do the math in my head. Well, anyway, they conclude that the US sits between democracy and authoritarianism. And they also compare US to other countries. Norway had the highest score. And then when you look at the US, UK, and Canada, similar kinds of countries, we are the lowest of those 3. We fall behind them. They all fall behind Norway. So democracy is in trouble. Now we have another, if you like numbers and you want to quantify it, here's a quantified measure. And they come out every year. Next. Democracy survived, but so did the threat. So Biden took office. It wasn't stolen, but 2/3 of Republicans believe that Trump won the election. The Democrats' already slim margin in Congress got smaller in this midterm. The election denier wing of the Republican Party now controls the House of Representatives. If you've been following the news about this, it's really, really troubling because they'll block everything and probably may introduce things that are not good for social work. Race, class, and gender inequalities continue to nourish anti-democratic forces, and more than one populist authoritarian is in the wings and already, pardon the typos, they're taking steps. And I'm speaking of Trump and DeSantis. Next. So the next threat to democracy is what predicted by the Democracy Index is populist authoritarianism. I just want to say a word about it so we become a little more familiar. You maybe not have given it this name, but you've seen it. Emerges by eating out democracy from within. Well, I just showed you some of the examples of what's happening to our institutions. It feeds on and fuels a decline of trust in elections, the press, the government, and then increases polarization. Sound familiar? It appears to people who prioritize social order, hierarchies, and the status quo, people who are threatened by increased diversity, the influx of quote unquote outsiders and changing social norms, and experience a sense of insecurity when faced with such changes. Now, voting in social work is a nonpartisan campaign, but if I take that hat off for a minute, these are things that have been said over and over again on the news media in the papers that characterize the base of the right wing of Congress, the former president, and many of those candidates. So these are conditions that we have to worry about. Next. And how is this activated? Well, someone with a large microphone plays to voter fears and insecurities. Check. Suggests a hidden conspiracy backed by the other is undermining our way of life. Check again. Rationalizes the violations of basic values, norms, laws, and constitutional protections and calls for violence. Well, the coup and other things that followed it fall into that box. And it's activated when populist leaders claim that voters cannot trust the current experts, judges, or media. Well, you've heard this, just think of the discussions about the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, and what was said about that. They paint themselves as ultimate arbiters of what presents as a threat, the other, etc. Suggests that only they can fix things. Some of you may not remember what Trump's first State of the Union address, he said, Only I can fix things. He used this exact word, only I can fix things, or something along those lines. And finally, when populist leaders refuse to denounce right-wing actions and groups, think Charlottesville, January 6th, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, and now we can add the latest Memphis, Tennessee murders. Next. So I'm starting to wind down. It's important to know that these threats to democracy take place in the context of record high inequality. This is really important. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, way back probably in 1940 or so, warned, we can either have democracy in this country, which we're worried about now, or we can have the great wealth concentration in the hands of a few. The wealth cap is the income district, I don't know what's the word I want to say. The 1% is the highest it's been in a long time in terms of the people who have the most money in this country. But he says you can have democracy or a concentration of wealth. You can't have both. You can't have both democracy and record high inequality, which is that's the risk we're facing now, because we have record high inequality. And when people's needs aren't met, they tend to follow alternative views that don't make sense to many people, except to themselves. Next. What can social workers do? We are good at diagnosing individual and social problems, yet we, along with many other Americans, are not always ready or comfortable with assessing the status of our democratic institutions. We need to up our game, and Terry Platt and others there are doing that, are doing a great job. But this is what I think has to be done. Next. So we must up our game by registering voters to strengthen democracy. First of all, it's just the right thing to do. Second, it supports the profession's missions and social justice values. And even if you're not a social worker, I know everyone on this call is not a social worker, but it supports your values and mission. We are in the right place. We sit at the intersection of the individual and society. That's our place, where we are best positioned to witness and address the harms brought by a faltering democracy, and to bring voter mobilization into the community, civic participation into agencies, and human rights into the United States. Next.
Dr. Abramovitz, as you're moving forward, because I'm getting absolutely excited. I'm looking at the chats coming through. I see people are trying to position themselves to raise some questions. And at the same time, I want to make sure as we move from the general to the specific to hear Dr. Platt's pointed pieces. Just wanted to bring that to your attention as we move.
I have 2 more slides, okay?
Okay.
And there are very few words. I said more than I planned to say, so that's why I ran over. Never forget, given everything I've just said, never forget what has been done can be undone. And that's what Terry Platt's going to talk about next. Imagine if all 700,000 social workers in the United States registered 3 voters and got them to vote, and they registered 3 more, and so on. That's our Power of 3 campaign. Next. No need to imagine, be part of the solution. Organize a Power of 3 voter registration campaign. Be part of history, register 3 people and ensure they vote. Check out our website. Next. I'm an old organizer, I'm a former organizer. Don't mourn, organize. Next. Thank you.
Well, everyone, let's give her a hand. You know, one of the things that I find myself just absolutely excited about, and Doc, as you're listening, I mean, I'm taking these copious notes of just several questions and comments that I certainly want to pose. But when we move from the general to the specific, this is like a track meet now, and now you're handing it off to Dr. Platt, who's the anchor to bring it in. As we're moving from the general to the specific, now she's going to talk about what the collaboration on the campus and the work that they've been doing on this campus, especially involving social workers in this activist movement for social work. So Dr. Platt, you got it.
All right. Wow. Wow. Professor Abramovitz, you shared so much rich history, so much context. You've given us so much to think about. And I think you really set the stage for thinking about how we in Georgia experience the midterm election. And so I wanted to highlight some of the strategies that we utilized on our campus in order to engage students in electoral participation. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about my civic life, not all of me, but just a little bit of me. So one of the things I think is very poignant is in 2020, as we were remote as a campus, and I was communicating a lot with my students in preparation for the semester. We were thinking about what could we do to still encourage students to get out the vote and encourage faculty and take advantage of partnerships. So we created CAU Votes. It was a co-creation activity between me and several students. And we brought on several other faculty members, and it has grown into what it is now. And so I'm really excited about that. One of the things I also want to highlight is in 21 through 22, I was a fellow with the National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement at University of California, Irvine. And my research project focused on electoral engagement strategies utilized by HBCUs, and what are some of the innovations and lessons that can be learned and generalized to the larger population and to other institutions. Additionally, I serve as a community of practice fellow in this year for HBCUs for the All-In Democracy Challenge. And what helped us to do this work this year has been a lot of feverish grant writing, lots of small grants in order to support student voter engagement. It costs money to do some of the work. And so with small budgets, how do we make it happen? We grant write. And so, I'm really excited and really grateful for the collaboration with the Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work, because they helped me to spend the money well and amplify impact. So let's move to the next slide. So some of the realities that we faced going into 2022 was a slew of voter suppression policies. Some of them were rollbacks of the expansion of access to the ballot that occurred during COVID-19, and some of them were brand new. One of the most people know about Senate Bill 202, which included several provisions, which included the prohibition of handing out gifts. We understood or gifts was identified as being water and food, but it also includes a pen. It includes a chair, a napkin, anything constitutes a gift. And so, when you think about what that means in areas or precincts where the lines are extremely long, that can have a real impact when you have people standing in line for 2, 3, 4 hours to cast a ballot. And so these are just some of the realities that we were up against going into the Georgia midterm election. One notable change that really impacted our efforts was changes in how we do voter registration. And so in order to register voters now in Georgia, individuals must go through deputy registrar certification, which means you have to register with your county and then participate in a certification process, and you're sworn in order to be able to just touch the application of someone, much less help them or answer a question associated with their ballots. It's had a chilling effect on a number of organizations that used to or have had a history of registering voters, to where this was one of those provisions that wasn't recognized for being what it was on its face. The other thing I would also want to point out is, casting of provisional ballots. If you cast them outside of your precinct, they would not be counted. And so we found quite a few challenges to individuals' voter status, and they were told to cast provisional ballots. But if you were outside of what was defined as your precinct, your ballot was not counted in this 2020 to midterm election. And then the other reality is the ambiguity around the enforcement or the application of these new laws. We spent a lot of time on the phone with the Secretary of State's office, just reading the codes and trying to talk with them to understand them so that we can make sure that we were within the boundaries of the law. And then also working with Fulton County Board of Elections to make sure we're within the boundaries of the law. So these had real impacts. And many of the organizations we worked with in 2020, we could not work with in 2022 because these new policies were in place and they were not fully in compliance. And so, so it really changed our work. So let's move to the next slide. So these are some things that I think were very specific to students. So one was that there were limits to early voting on college campuses here in Georgia, particularly in Fulton County. Actually, there was going to be no early voting on college campuses. When we were applying to be an early voting location, we were told that our odds were slim in being selected. There was an effort to, through the ACLU, to petition on behalf of college students. And so they did decide to give us early voting locations on our campus, but we only had like one day. And then, but one day per campus and not the same day. For each campus. And so it's really interesting when we begin to look at what this may mean for mobilizing students, faculty being able to take whole classes. Well, that may not have been the day you had class and you may have missed your early voting opportunity. Other thing as well is the reduced hours. So the hours of early voting on college campuses did not align to early voting hours at other locations. And so from where earlier you could vote from 7 until 7, we could only vote from 8:30 to 5. And so that is a real impact in terms of the amount of time students have to get to these locations. The other thing that I wanted to just highlight that impacted students at CAU in particular are student IDs. Student IDs from private colleges within Georgia are not acceptable as voter IDs. And so, and this was a real challenge because we were able to identify representatives from organizations we hadn't heard of coming onto our campus and other campuses within the Atlanta University Center, trying to tell students that they could use their student ID, which was not necessary, which wasn't true. And so the other few points that I wanted to highlight, as well as absentee ballot request requirements were rolled back from COVID to where before they were automatically sent out or you could request them. Now you had to give a reason and how you were able to provide evidence of your identification. You needed to include a photocopy of it within your information. And so it's just really interesting, just some of these realities. And then the other is transportation to polling places. One thing I wanted to highlight with CAU, which showed up in our work, is we're a split campus. And many faculty and students do not realize that we are a split campus. Those who reside on main campus can vote at Morehouse for the general election. Those that reside on the other side of Student Movement Boulevard from the Student Center all the way to MLK have to vote at Central United Methodist Church. So you bypass, if you're coming from main campus, you'll bypass Morehouse, you'll bypass voting location at Friendship Baptist Church to go further to Central United Methodist Church to actually cast a ballot. And this was something where we had some challenges in getting the information out, but this was a part of our effort. Next slide, please. And so when I speak about a partnership and collaboration in order to really make it happen, it took a lot of mobilization on our part. And one of the things I just really am grateful to the Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work, particularly Dr. William Thomas and his team, Dr. Cardia Swift, Dr. Ivis King, Dr. Anafade, and their students. It was just, I think, a significant effort in order to raise awareness, to register students to vote, and then to get them to cast a ballot. So these are just some of the activities that we were able to do that I believe are notable. One is our National Voter Registration Day Block Party. I think this was a really lively event where we had a number of organizations who were getting students and supporting our effort to get students to sign pledge cards if they'd already registered to vote. And then we were there with Fulton County Board of Elections, and they had the voter mobilization bus to register students to vote. There was a challenge with D9 or Divine Nine organizations, Black Panhellenic Greek lettered organizations to see who could share the most information about voting with the largest number of students. And so we had several organizations that were present and trying to help make this day be a success. From, there were food trucks, there was ice cream, there was music, it was beautiful. But one of the things I think that made it be an amazing event was the information that was being shared and the awareness that was being raised about key issues, about voting, and how it matters for college students. The other thing that we did was midterm pizza to the polls. So during the midterm exam week, we had a pizza break. So students were able to just pop in, get some pizza, and then take away some information about voter registration and participation in the AUC. We invited students from Morehouse and students from Spelman and students from Clark Atlanta, and we were able to push out a lot of really good information about how you can, trying to keep voting on their mind, voter participation on their mind. Other strategies that we used was the information blitz. So we used yard signs, social media, posters, stickers, emails. But one thing that we invested some of our resources in was Motivote, which is a voter engagement app that you can tailor to your school for targeted engagement and gamification of participation in voter mobilization activities. So if you attend certain events, then you get a certain number of points. You can group as teams. I will say that the Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work ended up winning the entire Motivote competition challenge because you all's numbers were so large and your outreach was so significant. But it was a tool, a strategy, the first time using this type of application to support our work. And I see opportunities for us going into 2024 to use something similar, if not the same. One of the things I think was really important is as we were moving into homecoming, trying to make sure that we continue to keep the momentum. So we partner with the Atlanta University Center Consortium and the Homecoming Committee to have what we call Vote Coming, which was similar to National Voter Registration Day, but it was after registration was over. And so to encourage people to get out to vote early. So we're talking to our registered voters, and those who aren't registered, we're wanting them to be encouraged to get others out to vote and to know that it is still not too late for you to register to vote for future elections. And so it was a really good day. The weather was great. Participation was great. Puma was out giving out free shoes and shirts. And so just encouraging engagement during our first day of homecoming. And I think it was a really good experience in terms of supporting that momentum. Many of the students that we were working with, some of the undergraduate students who were residential assistants, did what we call a dorm storm. It's taking some of the on the ground, boots to the ground, knocking on doors, mobilization that we do on the street in the grassroots way into the dorms. So they went door to door within the residential halls, posting door signs about student voter participation, speaking about issues of why it matters to students at CAU to get involved and cast the vote. And so they were able to hit a significant number of our residential facilities, just going door to door, one by one, trying to connect individually and personally with the students, which aligned with our efforts to ask every student, which is an initiative, ask every student to vote. And the last one that I would like to highlight has to do with our pathways to the polls. As I mentioned, we have difficulty emphasizing that our polling location is about a mile away. Feels like a mile away at least. And so it may be a path that many students have not walked before. So what we did was we had printed some really large vinyl dots, and we put them with arrows and put them along the way to take you all the way to Central United Methodist Church, all the way up to the doorstep so that students could know where to vote. And we worked with Danette Adams with Student Affairs to get the message out and the map out to students to let them know where our voting location is for Clark Atlanta University. Next slide. So we did a lot. This is a lot of energy, a lot of effort, a lot of collaboration, teamwork. Dr. Thomas invited me to some of his team meetings where I got an opportunity to listen to strategy for amplifying, the issues that matter, connecting with students in very real ways within classrooms, outside of the classrooms, so that we could, produce the outcome that we were hoping for. So when we look at our results, as Dr. Jones highlighted, we had over 2,000 interactions and engagements. The reality is it's somewhat hard for us to quantify. I did not include the dorm storms because I don't know how many doors. I don't know how many students that they talked to. I have an idea of how many dorm rooms they knocked on, but I don't know how many engagements they had. So I'm quite confident the number is much larger. And the other thing that I wanted to just kind of highlight is this engagement was beneficial for not just encouraging attendance at a wonderful event, but encouraging participation in collective action to raise awareness about student civic engagement and voter engagement. The other impact had to do with registration. What we saw was students were registering to vote on site, using our QR codes in order to register to vote, taking advantage of the presence of Fulton County Board of Directors, Board of Elections, in order to register to vote and check their voter registration status. The reality is, though, this was one of the key aspects of our outreach that was impacted by voter suppression in Georgia. We were not able to partner with as many organizations as we have in the past to support student voter engagement. I'm the only deputy registrar within the Atlanta University Center, at least I was at the time of voter registration for 2022. It was complicated to get the information out and to get people to sign up and participate in the scheduled certification opportunities because they weren't widespread. It's difficult to register when you go to the website. You can't access the form unless you call. Then they send you an email. You know, there are layers to getting that deputy registration certification. And that really, really hampered our activities. But we were still successful in many ways. As I said, the bus came out 5 times to our campus and stayed for significant portions of time in order to support our student voter activities, which allowed me not to have to be present, but we had certified registrars on site to support our registration activities. So then we get to the voting. While youth voting in this election was really high, and we would look forward to seeing what our campus numbers are, the reality is also that Black youth voting was lower this election than the overall youth voter turnout. And I think it's really interesting that across HBCUs, we're starting to hear from Tufts, which manages NCIL, which is the National Study of Leadership and Voter Engagement data, which many of our campuses use in order to understand our student voter engagement, is that for HBCUs, our numbers were a little bit low. And it's not for lack of effort. It's voter suppression laws. Many of our campuses are in states where there were new laws enforced and implemented, and that had an impact. And so we're not necessarily seeing an indication of apathy, but we're seeing indication of voter suppression. And so the full results from NCIL won't be out until this fall. I know we have a wait. And so I'm looking forward to receiving the information. And as we'll get the information, I'll feed it back out to the campus. And then the last thing in terms of impact is awareness. Students learned about issues that matter to them. I believe that we were able to share information about processes, political processes, particularly in Atlanta and Georgia. And so many more students are interested in understanding that process so that they can impact it. And then thinking about accountability for our campus in terms of how we support student voter engagement, accountability for elected officials and, their representation of our interests as it relates to civic infrastructure, but then also for those who are elected to office. And so I think there is a heightening of awareness that hopefully we can build on this year as we go into preparations for 2024 election. Next slide, please. And so when we think about next steps, so there are 3 things we're focusing on. 1, civic education, institutionalization, making sure that as an institution, we have a deep commitment and provide deep support for student voter engagement, not just through the parties, but through learning modules, through teach-ins, through standard information that's provided to students when they come in as incoming freshmen or first-year graduate students, so that students know that CAU is committed to supporting their engagement. But then the other part is from the individual with civic education to the institution, Clark Atlanta through institutionalization. We're looking beyond our campus at civic infrastructure. How can we begin to shape and impact the structure of voting within Fulton County, but then also within our state? And I think there's some advocacy opportunities, but it does begin with making sure that individuals are registered to vote and that they're informed about processes and pathways. So we'll go to the next slide, please.
Dr. Platt, as you're doing that, it's amazing because there are a number of students, some of the questions that comments you just made, we are literally seeing a number of students are posing the same questions. I'm looking at some of these, and I see you're on your final slide, but I'm just looking at these very quickly. Some students are saying, well, how do we get more engaged? You know, what is our role in preparation for the next opportunity? I know we're running to the end, so I'm going to let you get this slide in, and then I need to present some of these questions to you very quickly.
Wonderful. I just wanted to identify many of the organizations that supported us either financially by providing material or providing student fellowships, information, and helping us to get students out to vote. And so I just wanted to make sure that we identified and highlighted our support and our resources. So thank you.
Beautiful. Let's give Dr. Platt a hand. Thank you very much. Again, we're literally setting the tone. There were some questions that came, and I know we have about 7 minutes left, but there were some great questions that I saw that was presented. And I think what stands out more questions were, how do we overturn these voter suppression laws? What do we do? How do we engage our local officials in the work that needs to be done to overturn some of these laws, or what loopholes can we take to address it? I want to give that to Dr. Abramovitz, but again, we have about three to 5 minutes left. So if our responses can be very short, because we got a lot of questions I want to pose to you all.
Okay, well, first of all, I think everything that Terry told us is one of the ways to do it. You fight back, you make sure that people do what they're supposed to do in terms of voting. But I would like to add, if you remember the little bit of history about the role of social movements, it's not enough, I don't think, these days to count on the state legislatures, the federal government to make the changes. They are polarized, they are blocked, they're inactive, or else they're against this. So we have to organize. I said at the end, don't mourn all this, organize. Have to organize or join existing social movements, whether it's Black Lives Matters or other ones, and give them, if you don't have the money, give them your time and energy, because only pressure from below, that's from us, will make a difference. We can lobby till the end of the day, but if they don't move, they're not going to move. So in addition to doing all that, has to be done, but find a way to engage in some kind of active social protest or movement that's local movements that I don't know how to name.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And Dr. Platt, students are asking what next? When is the next wave in terms of the School of Social Work and your work in terms of getting more of our younger people to vote, since you identified that? And there's a connecting question too, is that you have a lot of freshmen that come in, they're first-time voters, and how do we involve them in the voting process as well?
Oh, these are excellent questions. I think one is we need to continue to organize. There are many student organizations that already exist that are doing this work, that are registered with Student Affairs, but I also think that there are opportunities to connect with your faculty. We've already identified voting as social work is very active within the School of Social Work through Dr. Thomas and his committee. And so I encourage you all to share your ideas, share your enthusiasm for that level of engagement. The other thing I'll say as far as getting freshmen involved, many freshmen think they're going to vote in absentee processes back home, but they don't. And many of their parents think that their child would do that, or their student will do that. So helping them to know what their absentee ballot process and options are when they first come to Clark Atlanta. And then, but also I support personally that vote where your body is, encouraging people to care about the issues that will impact their lives for the next 4 years, and trying to encourage them to register to vote here in Georgia as soon as we can and not wait for an election.
Okay.
And Karen, Dr. White, if I may, I just want to jump in here for a minute and just say that this is you said talk with your professors. This is not just a Dr. Thomas initiative. This is a school-wide initiative.
Yes.
Every faculty member here should be able to provide you with some form of information about voter engagement. And if they can't, then they can always reach out to Dr. Thomas or some of the other folks, Ms. Swift, Dr. Anafati, I think Dr. Brown, all these people were involved in this initiative, and they are willing to help and share that information with you. So don't just, if you can't reach Dr. Thomas, or don't just overwhelm him. There are other faculty, and then I have faculty on this call tonight that may not have actively participated when we were doing the voter engagement, but they're hearing this information tonight, and they will also be able to help you. And then I'm also available.
Thank you very much, Dean. Well, before I turn it over to the Dean for the final comments, I want to say to the other team members, Dr. Thomas, who's been sitting here, I see you got your policy students. I see my doc students, many of our students and master's students here as well. To the faculty and staff of Clark Atlanta University, Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work, I'm excited too, and thank you for being present in here. This is what the culture looks like when we all get on the same bus and move to make the same impact that needs to definitely take place. I'm going to turn it over to our dean. And again, this is our Monday night lecture series. So you're going to see us again next month. And we got some good stuff coming up, given it's Black History Month in February, and then Social Work and Women's Month in March. And so you all put your seatbelts on for this history-making moment that you're about to engage in with the Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work Monday Night Lecture Series. So now I turn it over to the Dean.
Thank you, Gary. There's not much more than I can say. You have summed it up. I just want to leave these thoughts with you. First of all, I want to thank our presenters, Dr. Abramovitz and Dr. Platt. Dr. Abramovitz, you laid some very important history out there tonight that I hope each of you will take the time to look some of this up if you didn't know it, or let this resonate with you and how you might be able to become active and get involved in ways to kind of relieve some of the voter suppression. It's real. And as long as that's out there, you will, our democracy will be at stake. That's just the bottom line. Dr. Platt talked about all of the activities and the different methods of engagement that she and Dr. Thomas and the students were able to engage in this past semester. And again, my hat goes off to you, Dr. Platt and Dr. Thomas, for that work and staying the course to ensure that we have those touch points. The last thing I want to say to each of you that's on here tonight, and I'm saying this to our students, I saw some of our alums, so I'm not giving you the directive, but I am giving a directive to our students. You have a responsibility here. You have a responsibility to A, understand how this works, B, get involved, and C, help someone else get registered to vote. If you're already registered, okay, well then let's not just be registered, vote. I agree with Dr. Platt when she said that having a body to go vote in versus doing a absentee ballot. If you live out of state, get your absentee ballot in place. Again, we are how many months out before 2024? What, 10 months out? It will be here before we know it. We know the kinds of things that we had to endure in the state of Georgia last time with the election. While somebody put in the chat that Raphael Warnock won, but we see what we had to go through to get there. And that was by the chin of his chinny chin chin. So the thing, my point here is, let's be proactive. Let's not wait until the last minute. Let's engage people now about the 2024 midterm elections that are coming up. Let's get active, please. That is my one request of each of you. And as Dr. White said, this entire semester, all of our Monday night lectures will be tied to voter engagement, voter suppression, the whole issue around voters, because if you take nothing away from this semester, I hope that you will be able to say that you learned a lot about our democracy, you learned about why voting is important, and that you actually participated and engaged someone around voting. That is my hope for each of you. Thank you so much for participating. Again, I cannot thank Dr. Abramovitz and Dr. Platt. Both were wonderful, wonderful speakers. They taught us a lot tonight. Those of you who came on late, now you see why having Dr. Abramovitz come. I think I told you guys we go back 20-something years ago. And the work that she's doing now is the work that she has been engaged in since I met her. And I know Dr. Thomas and I always talk about my passion and my love for social welfare policy. It ties back to that work. And so that's why this is so important to me. Thank you guys. We had I think over at one point, there were over 70 people on this a part of this group. I think
we had 80, Dean.
80. Okay. All right. All right. And Dr. White, thank you so much. A wonderful, wonderful job facilitating this process. And we will try to get your questions pulled up from the chat, and maybe we can reach out to you with some type of response. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thank you all.